When we had Google Fiber installed, we discovered that our home already had Gigabit Ethernet in every room, courtesy of the Cat5e cable used for all the phone sockets. In theory, all we needed to do was unplug a cable from the telephone panel and plug it into one of the 4 available ports on the Google network box. I say in theory because it didn't work immediately. In this video, I'll walk you through our setup and show you how you can get your Cat5e phone cables powering your whole home with Gigabit Ethernet speeds. We have 8 phone sockets, but only use one with a series of wireless phones that deliver a whole house coverage. The same couldn't be said for Wi-Fi. We'd been using AV power lines to chain multiple Apple AirPorts with existing electric cables. It worked, but there was a noticeable drop-off in speed tests. Using the Cat5e phone sockets, we connected 4 AirPorts directly to the Google network box and created a much stronger Wi-Fi network with no drop-off in speed tests. Our installer connected a room that had 2 coax and 2 RJ45 sockets like the ones you're seeing here. One of the RJ45s was for the phone and the other for Ethernet. Behind the faceplate, the phone cable was blue and the Ethernet grey. The phone socket was already in use, so back at the network box our installer put an RJ45 data plug onto the grey Ethernet cable. We hooked up an Apple AirPort back at the RJ45 socket and it worked fine once we changed the router mode from DHCP and NAT to bridge mode. Make the changes in your AirPort utility app on your Mac, iPhone or iPad. When it came to the phone sockets, none of them worked when switched to Ethernet. Our installer thought it must be something to do with the AirPorts, and since he didn't have any experience with them, left us to figure things out. After confirming all the settings were correct, I focused on the cables, specifically how they were wired. They all worked with a phone signal, but just not Ethernet. Before leaving, our installer told me that a phone only uses 4 of the 8 wires in a Cat5e cable, and that there are 2 basic wiring standards, T568A and T568B. So long as both sockets and plug are wired the same, on the same length of cable, it doesn't matter which you choose. This led me to believe that whoever installed the cabling probably focused on the 4 wires that deliver the phone signal and didn't pay much attention to the others. Having never wired an RJ45 socket or plug before, I did some research to figure out how everything worked and which tools I'd need to fix it. The rest of this video is about sharing what I learned. Every phone socket can now be connected to the Google network box and receive gigabit signals. If you've run into the same problem, keep watching, it's a simple fix. If you're lucky, the only tool you'll need is an RJ45 crimper and a screwdriver. But if the wiring at the socket isn't correct, you'll want a wire picker and a push-down tool to secure the connections. I'm showing you everything I used here, including the tape and pen to clearly mark each cable with the location of the socket back at the network box. Get everything via Amazon or at your local Home Depot, Lowe's or hardware store. I'll introduce the specialist tools and model numbers as I use them. Step 1. Check how your socket is wired. Remove the cover plate and check that each wire matches the color on the key of your socket. This socket is clearly marked as T568A. There are 2 banks for securing the wires, 4 on the left and 4 on the right. Each is color coded, so check they match up. Solid blue to the blue square, white with blue stripe to the half white, half blue square, and so on. Your socket may have the T568B scheme or show both permutations. Just clarify that the socket is wired correctly for one of them and make a note, A or B, so that you can wire the plug at the other end appropriately. If your wires don't match either scheme, it's probably easier to rewire it from scratch. I'll show you how later in this video. Step 2. Install a new RJ45 data plug. This is what an RJ45 data plug looks like. I'm using a pass-through plug here from Klein Tools. It basically simplifies the process of making sure that your wires are correct before crimping. Let's start with the fresh piece of cable. I cut off the existing data plug. You'll need a pass-through crimping tool for this data plug. A regular one won't work. They cost a little more, but for the extra peace of mind, worth the extra. I'm using the Klein Tools VDV 226-110. Take the tool and use the strip feature to remove about 3 inches or 6 centimeters of the cable sheath. I tried removing just 2 inches to begin with and really struggled. The cable I'm using here has relatively thin wires that are pretty flexible. The ones in the wall were much thicker and difficult to line up. So for your first plug, err on the side of caution and give yourself plenty of wire to work with. You'll thank me later. We can now see 4 twisted pairs. Before untwisting them, slide on a cable strain relief boot to give your cable some added protection. Next, split out the wires and untwist them. Order them to match the standard that you're going to use. I'm using T568A here, which is green-white green, orange, white, blue, blue, white, orange, brown, white, and brown. You're working with copper wire here, so each thread will be wavy and rigid. This works against you when inserting the plug, so use your fingers to straighten them out. Now comes the tough part, inserting the wires into the plug. Make sure you have the plug the right way up. I put the wiring diagram on screen here. If the clip on top of the plug faces up, position 1 is on the far left as you look at it. For the T568A standard, that means slot 1 uses the green-white wire. Push your first wire through until it comes out at the other end of the plug. Continue with the other wires following the order for the standard you are following. Every now and then, check to make sure that each wire went through the right hole. As you will see here, it's very easy to make a mistake. The holes are small and tightly packed. This is why you need that extra length and why it's important to straighten out your wires. If there are bumps or kinks as you push the wire in, it could quite easily go into the wrong hole. If you miss a hole, simply remove the wire and try again. You may have to do this multiple times. When you have all the wires in place, pull them in so that the outer sheath gets pulled into the plug. Do a final check and make sure that you have the order correct. Next, use the pass-through crimper to trim and crimp the wires securely into the plug. Feed the wires through the RJ45 slot and press down the ratchet. Slide on the strain relief boot and you're done. Finally, test it. Plug it into your Google Network box and attach a laptop to the corresponding socket. If it works, congratulations, you just successfully wired your first Ethernet cable. If it doesn't, don't panic, retrace the steps. When you look at the socket wiring, pay close attention to how secure each wire is. Has it been pushed all the way down, or is it a little loose? Adjust as necessary. I'll show you how in the next section. When you started to insert the wires into your data plug, did you feed the first wire into slot 1 or slot 8? I made this mistake on my first plug. I had it upside down. The beauty of the pass-through plug is that it's easy to check. You can still see the wires where they were trimmed. If your eyesight isn't good enough to figure it out, use your iPhone to snap a picture and then zoom into it. Remember, if the clip on the top of the plug faces up, slot 1 is on the left as you look at it. If you got it wrong, cut off the plug and start again. Step 3 is optional. It's about wiring an RJ45 socket. This is the simple bit, so hopefully you won't need to do this and won't need to buy a punch-down tool. My guess is that if you're having problems, it's that whoever put the wiring into your home simply followed the color coding on the socket and got lazy with the data plugs. Let's start by unpicking the existing socket. I bought the Klein Tools push-down kit, which comes complete with a wire picker and an impact punch. The model number is VDV427-822. Use the hook on the wire picker to pull out the wires. Assuming you have enough length, cut the cable so that you have a fresh start. Use your crimper to strip 3 inches or 6 centimeters of the sheath. Untwist the pairs. Following the color code for T568A or B, place the wires into their respective slot. Do one side at a time. Use your punch tool to securely push each wire into its slot and trim the wire. Pay close attention to which side of the punch tool does the trimming. If you look at the blade, you'll see a piece that sticks out on one side. Make sure it's on the side that needs trimming. You may need to punch down multiple times. I certainly did. If this is the case, you can adjust the Klein Tools punch down to use a higher force. Adjust accordingly and/or repeat the process on each wire. Finally, test it. If you still can't get a signal and are confirmed that you have the wiring correct on both sides, the plug and the socket, then there may be an issue with the cables in your wall. I'm afraid I can't help you there. You'll need to get a professional installer. To wrap up, if you have a Cat5e cabling for your phones, you ought to be able to use them for gigabit connections to your Google Fiber network box, or any other router for that matter. If they don't work, it's probably a simple fix. Check the order of the wires on your phone sockets. Are they T568A or T568B? Make sure each wire is firmly in place and rewire as necessary. Back at the network box, cut off the appropriate data plug and rewire it to the same standard, T568A or B. Connect the data plug into an available port on your Google Network box and then plug a laptop into the appropriate socket. If you can get to the internet without Wi-Fi connected, you're done. Repeat the process for all of the other phone sockets. You now have a hardwired connection for Gigabit Ethernet, which means you can connect multiple Wi-Fi stations to get the whole home coverage without any dead spots. If you know of anyone that is getting Google Fiber installed or someone that struggles to get whole home coverage with their Wi-Fi, share this video. It could save them a lot of time and money.